Welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about MVP today. Hang on, let me get to the right screen here. And I apologize, I've got a bit of a cold, but doctors tell me that you're all safe. There's no way it can transfer across WebEx, so you should be in good shape. Okay, we're going to be talking about minimal viable product, and kind of a caveat as we get into this is this can mean a lot of different things to different people. And so we'll look at some of the definitions. If for some reason something we're talking about seems like, wait, that doesn't sound right, stop and think about the definition being used at that particular point in time, because there's lots of different ways to look at this, and it can be a very valuable tool in producing software, or really in a variety of different areas. But what I'd encourage you to do is, if you're working with your team and wanting to introduce the idea of MVP, or if you're finding you're struggling with it, a lot of times that comes down to the fact that people are using different definitions for what MVP means. Okay, so to start off with, let's look at some different definitions. Let me throw the link in here for everyone. So if you go to that link, it will pull up. I can't pop this one up in WebEx like I can with the other stuff. Or just go to minty.com and type in that number. So either the link in the chat, and keep in mind, there's not a right or wrong answer here. It's just when you hear this, what do you think of? And these are all definitions I've heard used to define minimal viable products. So it's not like this isn't a test to see if you get it right. I'm just wanting to see where we're all coming from. And also the big thing I want to illustrate is there's different ways to think of a minimal viable product. And if one person is using one definition and another person is using another definition, you're going to have all kinds of confusion when it comes to communicating with each other. So let's see, we've got 25 people. Okay. Looks like most of us are on the side of the smallest thing a real user might be able to use. And that's where my definition tends to go. Now, if you're dealing with something in different stages of product development, like when you don't even know who your customer is, it might look a little bit different. We'll look at some of those examples of that in a minute. Let me throw this link in here one more time, just in case anybody just recently joined. Okay, so we've got the different definitions. One over here is two people said a product with just enough features to get the attention of customers. That can be a very valid definition depending on what your goal is for the MVP. No one said the minimal version to collect the maximum validated learning about the customers, which I believe is the lean startup definition used. Minimal version to validate a hypothesis. We've got 8 people in that category. And 17 people over here saying the smallest thing a real user might be able to use, which this is usually where I'm trying to push people toward, but there's reasons for using all these definitions. Okay, so let's look at just enough features to get customers. So if we're trying to get something into the marketplace and we don't have any users already, the idea of creating something that's just have enough features to get customers, to attract the early adopters and maybe to start earning revenue, and to start creating metrics to guide the efforts. So this can be a very valid definition of MVP if you're not dealing with having actual customers. Now, if most of you aren't working for a startup that has no customers, you probably already have a customer. So this may not be the best definition for you, but it's important to recognize that there may be situations where this is a good definition if you're trying to discover if customers even exist for whatever it is you're wanting to build. The definition of saying minimal version to collect the maximum validated learning about the customer. So this is in some ways an even more, I'd say even more refined or slimlined version of the previous. This is what Lean Startup uses, the book Lean Startup uses as a definition. And what I like about it is it really focuses on the intentional learning and gets you to the point that you're starting collecting relevant metrics. So let me give an example here. The book, probably got it on my shelf here somewhere. The book, The 4-Hour Workweek. I don't know. Has anyone read that? And give me a thumbs up if you read it. I'm just curious if anybody's, or if you're familiar with it, heard of the book. It's a book by Tim Ferriss. Okay, evidently no one's read it. Okay. It's an interesting book about automating things and doing just, okay, we got some people that have read it or heard of it, about automating things and basically creating a kind of, I'd almost describe it as a lifestyle business, but it's got some really interesting ideas just about creating a source of income for yourself without like it being a 40, 60, 80 hour work week. Now what's interesting is when Tim Ferriss was looking at the title for this, He wanted to know what would be a good title, because it wasn't like his principles that he was trying to explain were good for a 4-hour work week, but not a 6-hour work week. So he took a bunch of different blank hour work weeks, made ads for those on Google, and figured out which one people clicked on the most. Did they click on 6-hour work week more, 5-hour work week, 8-hour work week? And what they found was, let's see, that's interesting. Okay. What they found was what he found was that more people were interested in the idea of a 4-hour work week. The 2-hour work week evidently sounded too unbelievable. But he was able to, so his minimal version was just running ads that took people to a sign-up page to get more information later, just so he could start getting relevant metrics for stuff. And I just want to introduce that this is an idea of a minimally viable version, just something that's just small enough that you can start interacting with your clients or your potential customers in some way to get information. Now, my guess is that most of you are coming from a place that's well beyond just trying to figure out what you should call your thing. On the other hand, I've worked on some very big software projects where our idea of just getting something out with a name on it inspired lots of conversations about what the product should be named within the government entity, and just getting something out the door was able to get that feedback, whereas if we just asked people what they wanted to be named, it was going to take forever. So minimal version to validate a hypothesis. So using this definition, does it matter if it isn't about the customer? Viable seems to imply more than just learning. And what I want to point out with this is it's easy for people to start saying MVP about things that have nothing to do with the customer. So if you hear your team start saying, we need to create an MVP to show that the database works correctly. And I've seen teams kind of fall into this trap to where they're not in a place that they're getting any validation back from the customer. They're just proving out their technology. And while I don't want to imply that there's never a case that would be valuable to spend some time doing, it can be a big trap that teams fall into, to where it's really hard to kind of break loose and be able to start actually delivering something. Viable seems to imply it's more than just learning, right? We're not just trying to figure out how do we make the database work. We're trying to actually get some information, some type of interaction with the customer. So if you're hearing MVP used in a way that doesn't imply any type of feedback from customers or people that might use your software, you should probably be wary of that, because it might be an indication that you're headed down a path that's going to produce maybe lots of code, maybe take lots of time, but without getting feedback. It may make it easy to spend lots of time producing something that turns out not to be useful to your customer. So in this definition, the smallest thing a real user could possibly use, this would mean they can't use something that isn't deployable, right? If you try to produce something and the customer can't actually touch it, it wouldn't count as an MVP, because it's not something they can actually get their hands on. This would also mean that there are many things done in the simplest way possible. So you may know that eventually your customer is going to want X, Y, and Z with all these bells and whistles, but you may find out that you can get that they can actually start using it with just X, without all the bells and whistles. It also means the smallest thing a real user could use also means that it provides some type of value, right? There's something about it that the customer at least is headed towards something the customer wants to do. They can see it as being progress. And I also want to point out, it could be a piece of a system being replaced, right? Your minimal viable product, if you're doing a replacement of a system, may be a situation where you say, oh, the account maintenance section, we're going to actually recreate that in this new system over here so people can start using it. And that may be your minimal viable product for the account maintenance. It may not do everything that the old system could do, but if it does 70% of what they need to do on a regular basis, that's an opportunity to start getting feedback from customers on the new system. I was working with our company was doing some software work for a lawyer who had homegrown, built his own development system to keep track of, evidently this is in Virginia, where is it exactly? I think it was in Virginia. If you get a speeding ticket over a certain miles per hour, it's not just a matter of you pay a larger fine. It's like you can go to jail for that. So his law firm was built around helping people, particularly people maybe from out of state that didn't realize that came in and ended up facing, going to jail for a speeding ticket. and he would had a system for reaching out to them and sending them letters and trying to say, hey, I can help you with this type of stuff. Anyway, we were building something new, some new functionality for them. So what we did is we couldn't replace all of it at one time. And so what we ended up doing is leaving the existing functionality there and then creating a new menu item for whatever this piece of it was that we were trying to improve, called the new whatever it was. And they could click on that, go into it, and use it. So that was a minimal viable product. It didn't do everything that the old system did, but it did some of the things they were asking for in a better way so they could use it for that, 80% that they normally did. And it was a way for us to start getting feedback from them, but they were still in a situation where if they ever decided, oh, wait, I need this isn't working, we didn't quite explain to Mark and his team what they needed to do here, I can jump back and do it the way that I'm always used to. But that smallest possible increment is a very important piece of this. So, question for you. In your current project, which improvement would be most beneficial? So, thinking of your current project, which improvement would be most beneficial? Let me throw the link to this here again. You can also go to minty.com and click on that. But it would be having better clarity in prioritizing work, limiting scope creep, starting to earn a return on investment sooner, earlier evidence that the team can deliver a working product. And it makes me feel good to see that we got so many people saying this one, earlier evidence the team can deliver a working product. Because I think a lot of times we assume that that's going to happen. If you work in a large organization, there are all manner of forces at work to prevent this from happening sometimes. So just getting to that point that you can deliver a working product is a very big step forward. The first two here, better clarity in prioritizing work and limiting scope creep. Sometimes those things actually go very much hand in hand. And then we got some people on the starting to earn a return on investment sooner. So let's talk about prioritization for a second. Slide that. So no matter how good your developers are, and no matter how good your requirements are, if you're not working on the next most important thing, you aren't operating as efficiently as you could be. Now, it's very possible that there's things that it's hard to say whether this priority is more important than this other, but in almost every software I've worked at, it's very easy to say that there are some things that are less important than some of the other things. And if we can at least make sure that we're not working on things that are not important, we'll be doing a lot better. And when I say that out loud, it sounds silly, but that's not how, like I mentioned, all those forces in large organizations. Let me give an example of what can happen. So let's say we're trying to replace an existing system. So we need the system to do, there's a couple things we need the system to do. One, we need it to do eventually we think we need it to do everything the old system did before, right? That's kind of the assumption. But are all those things just as important? Well, there are some things the system did before that probably no one is using. Those things shouldn't be as important as the things that people use on a day-to-day basis. There are also some things that are in the old system that we might think, oh, this is really important because it's in the old system, that people are using, but are used very, very infrequently. And there may be workarounds to do it. There may be other ways to do it as well. So it's very, very infrequent. Those may not be as important as the things that people use on a day-to-day basis. So this sense of prioritization of making sure that we're working on the most important thing for our next step forward is a very important piece of trying to be successful with software. We also mentioned the idea of limiting scope creep. I don't know if anybody's ever seen one of these pocket knives like this. This pocket knife has so many features that it probably makes most of the features nearly useless to use because it does so many things. I can't imagine trying to get the screwdriver and take something off with this. Or what else do we got? There's 2 different types of pliers. I think there's a magnifying glass in there. Oh, 3 different types of pliers I see. Something that looks like it might be used by a dentist to clean your teeth. Fingernail clippers. But all of these things become less useful to use because the scope has gotten so big. This is another piece that's very easy another thing that's easy to fall into and very related to prioritizing. And one thing I want to mention when it comes to MVP, like this thing, monstrosity right here, is not a minimally viable product. No 10 millimeters. I don't know. There may be one in there somewhere. There's some things I don't recognize, but this is not going to be a minimally viable product. This was not something that was grown by giving the customer just a little bit more ability to do things, getting their feedback, and then adjusting to get exactly what they need. This was literally, let's throw in everything we possibly can. And it makes for an interesting demonstration of all the things you could put in a pocket knife, but it's not particularly useful as a usable pocket knife. Also be something that outlasted its purpose. Yes, good point. And so this is where an MVP can actually help with this, of saying, okay, what's the next little piece that I can get information from? And one thing I want to point out with the idea of an MVP is that it's not enough just to go ahead and say, oh, here's the smallest thing we think we can deliver. Let's give it to the customer. And then let's ignore the customer and pretend we didn't hear anything when they tried to get us feedback from it. The point of an MVP is to get feedback. If you're not in a position to actually get feedback or to learn from it or to adjust from it, you're not going to get the benefits of having an MVP. Okay, so one of the things we mentioned was the earlier evidence of success or possibly earlier evidence of failure. It's easy to get in situations where we're building something thinking all these things are true and you don't know if it's actually true. The example of the 4-hour work week, the name of the book, I think is a good example of that. He didn't know which would be more successful. He may have found that some of the names were not interesting to people at all. Excuse me. So if he could eliminate some of the names that weren't going to work at all, that was success for him, right? I'm just saying. Earlier return on investment. If you can use an MVP to find out what your customers actually want and can actually use, you can decrease the amount of time until they start paying you for it. Now, if you're working in a place where your customers aren't paying you directly, your internal or something like that, you still can decrease the amount of time between when you built it and they can start using it in production. I've always been amazed at how, in looking at two teams, and one that's trying to build everything that's on their requirements exactly how it is and then give it to the customers, versus a team, excuse me, sorry about that. Okay, tickle my throat. So a team that's trying to build everything exactly the way they were asked for, and then turn it all over to the users, and another team that's taking each thing the user asked for and trying to find the smallest piece of that they can give to the customer, and start getting feedback on. And what I found is the one that does everything exactly the way that they've asked for will usually not produce very much of what the customer actually wants. Maybe exactly what they asked for, but not what they actually want and need. The other team is taking an MVP approach of saying, well, let's give them just the smallest thing that they can start giving us feedback on. I know that they ask for this big chunk of things. Let's give them the smallest thing that they say they could start using tomorrow and then get feedback on them. Those types of teams end up producing something that often is very different than what the customer was actually asking for originally, but often is much more aligned with what the customer actually wants. And the reason is because when customers are asking for something, what they say they want often includes all kinds of assumptions and ideas about what's easy to produce and what's not that aren't always true. And so if we're able to actually test those things out as we work through, we can enable the conversation with the customer to say, okay, here's what they asked for, but here's the piece that that they actually need the most. Okay, so let's rank these things. These 4 things we're talking about. I'm going to throw the link here again one more time. So what we're going to do is say, how hard is this, and also how important it is from these 4 aspects we talked about that MVPs help enable. And Derek, thanks for adding that to the content pod. I didn't know you could actually share stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. So it looks like these are all somewhat clustering together, which is fine. If we've got a diverse group, then we'd kind of expect that to happen. This exercise actually might be more interesting to do with your team. When I'm coming in and coaching teams, I usually use several things like this to look at different aspects of Agile and our approaches. And it's interesting because when you're working with people from the same organization or same team, you often see patterns emerge that you don't when we've got a random selection of people coming to the Agile Lunch and Learn. But it looks like all of us are saying most of these things would be very, very important, but are not particularly easy for our teams to do. There's some variance here. It looks like number 3, earn a return on investment sooner, is a little bit less important from our perspectives than some of the others. Most important one is clarity in prioritizing work, which is often very, very difficult to do. So there's probably not any takeaways for your organization that you can get from this looking at it with everyone. Although let's see what the distribution is on some of these. So that kind of shows you where we're all over the place on some of these things, which is fine. That's what we'd expect with this group. So what I think is valuable about this, takeaways that you're not alone, yes. What I think is valuable about this is just kind of thinking through those things for yourself. And what's easier, what's harder, and then asking why. If this is so important to us, why is it difficult? Are we doing things that are actually making this harder because the organization has barriers to this? Or maybe we're approaching it in a way that makes it harder. And this is the type of thing that going into a deeper dive with your particular team of saying, hey, we know this is important, why is this hard? Could be a very valuable thing. Okay, so here's an example of a lunch and learn invite minimal viable product. And this is a picture. I sometimes go through my recordings and see, do I have any pictures where I look particularly photogenic? And the answer is no. No, I very rarely have any pictures that look photogenic. I usually end up with a lot of stuff that looks a little bit more like this. But what I want to talk about here is the process, the invite that you got for this Lunch and Learn, kind of how it was created. When the Lunch and Learn started out, I was doing Outlook copy and paste. I was sending it to people as internal with a client, and I was just copying and pasting names into the carbon copy field of Outlook. Then I reached the point where it wouldn't let me put that many people in, and I had to break it up into two separate emails. Then I started keeping track of it in an Excel spreadsheet, so if people said they didn't want to be on the list, I could take them off, or if they wanted to be on it, they could be added to it. Then eventually got to the point that I was keeping track of it in a Postgres database, and this was just executing SQL at the command line level stuff. And then I made some scripts that would actually export it out to Google Groups. Now, the interesting thing about this progression, though, is if no one was interested in coming to an Agile Lunch and Learn at all, the Outlook copy and paste was a great place to start because it's very simple. I didn't have any investment in any programming or anything like that. I waited to find out, is this product actually something people are interested in before I started investing in building out more things, before I even worried about trying to create an Excel spreadsheet for it. So then eventually we got to where Postgres was being used to export stuff to Salesforce. And it got to be a little bit time intensive. It wasn't too bad, but I had like 15-20 minutes worth of work I had to do after each session to get new people in so they were added to the invites. And then eventually we built a web service from WebEx to Salesforce that would actually let them talk together. So it's more of clicking a button now than having to do a bunch of command line stuff. Then eventually we worked on the ERP Next-based site, which is what you see if you go to events.agilelunchandlearn.com. But notice the ERP Next-based site, which took quite a bit of effort to get that up and running. But what I want to point out is we weren't at a position where we were asking ourselves, will anyone even come to an Agile Lunch and Learn? We were at the point where we knew lots of people do want to come to an Agile Lunch and Learn. Is there a way we can make the manage of this, make it easier for them to sign up, easier for them to unsubscribe? Because early on with Outlook, if somebody wanted off the list, they'd have to say, hey, Mark, take me off the list. This is annoying. I don't want to hear about it. Now there's a link at each one that people can unsubscribe from. And then we continued to grow it, being able to do things like resend invites. If we get an invite out early and we need to resend, or something cancels and we need to update it, we have a way of doing that, things we didn't have earlier on. But the point of this, what I want to say is this took a very much an MVP approach where we were always driven by what's the next thing we can do to get feedback of whether it's valuable to do the next thing. And we just incrementally worked our way through this. Now, one thing I want to point out is the amount of work, if we had just started directly with the ERP-based site and built exactly what we have today, we wouldn't have had to do all that other work, right? We wouldn't need to do it. So it would have been more efficient just to do that. I'm being facetious here because we wouldn't have known what we needed to build if we hadn't have done all these other things. And watch out. And this is one of the common pushbacks you'll hear to the idea of doing a minimal viable product is, well, we know what we need, so let's just go ahead and build that instead of trying to do it incrementally or building a piece of it, because building a piece of it is less efficient than just building everything and delivering it. And if you actually do know what you need, and there's no need for clarity, no need to get feedback from the customer, that might be true. But chances are that assumption is very, very wrong. And I would really try to address that assumption with the team, because if you're making decisions based on that assumption that you know everything and you don't need the feedback from the people that are going to be using the software, you're going to make all kinds of mistakes in all kinds of areas that's going to make it much less efficient. So this process of trying things let us do a couple things. One, it gave us good risk management. We weren't building stuff for an audience that we didn't know was even interested in stuff, interested in coming to any of these lunch and learns. We also had a pretty good idea of how we needed to manage the unsubscribes and things, because we had actually been doing it manually. So we had a way of saying, okay, here's how people may want to get off. Here's how they may want to get on. So let's find ways to make that easier, what they're actually wanting to do instead of just our ideas about it. So that's just a simple example of something just doing the minimally viable thing to let us enable what we're trying to do, which in this case was invite people to come to these Agile Lunch and Learns. Another example, I've used this one before, was with a system where we needed a calendar to keep track of the federal holidays. And you probably heard me mention this quite a few times because I think it's something really easy to get your mind around. We were rewriting a system. The old system had a way to go in and see a calendar and see what dates were listed as federal holidays, and then add new ones. So like the Juneteenth, when that became a federal holiday, being able to add stuff like that. And also adjust if there's some weird rule that the system isn't keeping track of, that, on this time it's the second Monday instead of the first Monday or something. So we had that in the existing system. They wanted it in the new system as well. But we were able to defer it because we were prioritizing and said this probably isn't as important as some of the other things. So we deferred it. And then we got to a point where we had to decide, do we want to go live? We could go live without this, or we could wait and build it. And the business owner said, you know what? If everything else is done that we need to go live, we don't want to hold up going live with this calendar thing, because we can just make an Excel spreadsheet for the next 2 years, load it directly into the database, and that does everything that we need, and we're good for 2 years. So in those 2 years, we can prioritize, and maybe at some point it becomes the next most important thing to work on. But chances are there's a lot of other things that will have a better return on investment. So the MVP for this particular feature in the system was create an Excel spreadsheet and manually load it into the database. Now that worked really well for this because they only needed to do this every year or every 2 years. It wasn't something that was like eating up a whole bunch of time. But they were able to go ahead and get the minimally viable piece of functionality without building things that were in the system that they were replacing. And as far as I know, they never went back and actually rebuilt this. Maybe they did at one point, but they made the decision that going live with the entire system was more valuable than having a UI for this calendar. I don't know if they ever built the UI, but that type of approach, what I just described, of taking an MVP approach to each feature as we went through it and prioritizing carefully, made this particular system, keep in mind this is your tax money if you live in the US that was building this, it had been quoted at $50 million using a process that probably would have expanded to 60, 75 million based on other projects that had been done in that way. We ended up doing it for $15 million because everything was done in this way of really, really being careful and prioritizing what's the next most important piece. They also were able to do it with about 5 to 8 developers in 4 years instead of what would have been projected of 50 developers in 5 years. So the MVP approach can be very, very valuable as you work through trying to make sure you're working on the next thing and just proving each thing out. And the nice thing about this particular thing with the calendar, and the calendar is just an example of one thing that's easy to talk about. They were doing this with every single piece of functionality. I remember at one point, I think it was on this system, there were like 250 reports. And the developers were pretty sure that people weren't using all these reports. I developed over the past 20 years all these different reports. But some people in the organization were saying, oh, we need every single report that's in this list. So another coach came up with the idea, and he said, why don't we just say that they're all done, and then if they can't get what they need to do, they'll file a bug report, and we'll just go ahead, because it'll take us half a day at the most to create one of these reports. We'll just go and create it on demand, list it all as done, and then create it whenever they file a bug report saying they can't use it. And while I liked the idea of this just-in-time delivery like he was describing, I felt a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of saying it was done when we knew it wasn't. And what we ended up doing is we were able to pull, I think we were able to actually pull a list of saying, here's how often these reports are being viewed. And so the ones that were being viewed regularly, we built all those. The other ones we said, we'd be happy to build these for you if you ever need them again. But since you haven't used them in the last 2 years, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to need them in the next 2 years. And finally that worked out. But that was still, once again, the minimal viable number of reports. We were able to find ways to figure out what that was to go live instead of building everything that we could possibly build as part of it. So now here's an interesting question that you may have come up sometimes. Does the customer want an MVP? So this is where, and these conversations get very, very interesting, because if you're starting to talk to a team, particularly if you're working with people that are really trying to see the whole big picture and all the things, and they're imagining the end state of everything that they want without imagining an incremental process of getting there. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes architects particularly fall into this category. And so if you try to describe something, hey, we can just load up 2 years of calendar data into the database and they'll be good to go for the next 2 years, they'll be like, but that's not what the customer wants. The customer wants the UI on it. And there's truth to both of those statements. There is truth that the customer is wanting a UI for doing this particular thing. And a good way that I've seen to kind of counter this thing of, well, does the customer actually want an MVP, is asking us this: does the customer want something? Does the customer want some capability or some return on their investment before they get everything that they could possibly get? And most of the time, you can kind of have these conversations and walk through the idea that being able to do something today and start getting feedback on the process and start getting return on investment is more valuable than the customer having to wait until everything is done, and then you get feedback and often discover all the things that you built that wasn't the way that they wanted it. Another way of phrasing the question is, does the customer want an option to go live earlier? And this has been very very helpful. I found this to be a very helpful question to ask when a team's really struggling with pressure to go ahead and build everything up front and not try to get the system to a place where it could be delivered and could be used incrementally. It's more of a, let's work on all the things. So like, for example, there might be pressure to start more things at the same time. Work on 10 stories at the same time instead of working on 3 and just trying to get them all the way through and completed and then working on the next 3. But asking, does the customer want an option to go live earlier? And so the way I often phrase this is, I said, is there any possible future that things could change and we would be willing to go live with a subset of all the things that we think we need to go live today? And usually the answer is no, but then I push back and say, like, imagine if everybody got sent home because of a pandemic and the entire team's sick for some reason. If that was happening, that was delaying the date past a certain point, would you be willing to say, okay, there's at least one feature that we wanted that we're willing to go live without? And if that's the case, would you like the option to be able to do that? Would you like the option to be able to go live without necessarily having to have everything done? And usually you can get people to say, yes, that option would be nice. And then it comes down to saying, okay, well, let's make sure that we're building just the minimally viable part of what you need, which often means splitting stories into different parts and doing part of them and deferring other parts till later, because that gives you the option. And also puts you in the driver's seat, because it means that if you get to a point and you're like, no, we really want these other things, that's fine. We can always delay the date that we go live, but we can't take work that we did that we now are willing to not have and trade it for something else in the future. The only thing we can do, the closest thing we can do that, is just being really careful how we prioritize and how we approach this MVP concept today in order to give us options in the future that we wouldn't have if we did it a different way. Okay, so that's the core of what I wanted to cover here. Okay, we're doing good on time. So we're now going to give away, let's see what my inventory is looking like over there. We'll give away a t-shirt, okay? Probably one of these. I'm not sure unless I don't have your size. I might need to get some printed more. So Agile LnL with Mark Shed. And gotta tell you kind of a funny story. I went to the pharmacy the other day to pick up some medicine for my cold. But I'm standing there, and the lady the pharmacist who I've talked to her before, but not to where I would expect her to remember my name. And she said, "Okay, Mark, what's your birthday?" And so I told her my birthday, and she got everything and looked everything up. I was like, "This is she really remembered me. That's amazing." And then I realized I'm wearing my name right here on my shirt. That might have been a little bit of a clue as to what my name was when she looked it up. Um, anyway, that was happened the other day. I thought it was kind of funny. So my next goal is to like get my name, my social security number, my insurance card, my date of birth all printed on my shirt, and I can just go in and I'll feel like the person just knows me really, really well because they can just pull everything up all together. Just joking. I would not suggest doing that. Okay, so go ahead and join. We're giving away a copy of these shirts, which the way I just described it makes it sound like you may go somewhere and end up with getting one of my prescriptions if you go to our local pharmacy, but that probably won't happen. Okay, got a few more people joining. We're going to give away a t-shirt, and let's go through and look at the questions. And these are all my perception of what I said. You may have different ideas, but or I may not have said something as clearly as I want, but we'll do it just for fun as a way to kind of interact with the content just a little bit more. Remember, answer fast to get more points. That's odd. Okay, do we get a leaderboard first? You're going the wrong way. Hang on, something's not working here. Whoops. Hang on, let me go back. I think I did something wrong. Okay, so got everybody here. Press enter to start quiz. Okay, do you guys see questions on your screen? What does MVP stand for in the context of this talk? I wasn't being patient enough. Okay, most valuable product, minimal viable player, Mark's Vaults Penguins, minimal viable program, or minimal viable product? What does MVP stand for in the context of this talk? And yes, it was minimal viable product. No one voted for Mark Vaults Penguins. These others are very, very close, but minimal viable product. And like we looked at, there's different definitions that could be used. You've got to make sure your team's using the right one. For most of us, if we're working particularly on in-house software development, it's probably the smallest thing that the customer can see as progress and use in some way. Okay. Who's in our top spot? Actually, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Is it age? Age? Not sure. Anyway, you've got the top score so far. Next question. Answer fast for more points. What might the picture of this large knife be an example of? Would be an example of a minimal viable product, scope creep, proper prioritization, or early evidence of success. Based on our discussion, what do you think would be the best, or what do you think Mark would think this would be the best example of? Yes, scope creep. Proper prioritization, my guess is at some point we got what you probably just slipped when you clicked it. The reason I would say it's probably not proper prioritization is because there's probably something in there that you don't need that makes it harder to use the things you do need. So that might be an example of where the prioritization is broken down. Okay. Top spot. Oh, age, if I'm pronouncing that right, maintains the top spot. Very good. Followed by Brandon, Shammy, Sarah, who got the fastest on this one, Jody, Maureen, Thinky, Phil, John, and Roger. Next question. What could be a definition of an MVP? Lots of different definitions. What could be a possible definition? All the features that might be desired, the architecture of the application, the most basic application a user could possibly use, or the set of features that business has asked for. Which of those would be a better description of an MVP than the others? Yeah, so the most basic application the user could possibly use. And the reason it probably wouldn't be this one, the set of features that the business has asked for, is like I mentioned, the business is going to have a lot of assumptions that goes into their list of things that they ask for. I've seen places where the business asks for you to build something that they already have the capability somewhere else. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a matter of they may not know how to do that. I've also seen lots of cases where businesses have asked for us to build a lot of analytical capability into the application. But when you ask and say, what if we just made it so you could download it into Excel? They say that would be far better because we already know how to use Excel and we can do things that we wouldn't think to ask for now. And it's a way to give them more of what they want by having a conversation instead of just doing exactly what they happen to ask for. So those are reasons that maybe the most basic application a user could possibly use is a better example of an MVP, whereas the features they ask for might include some things that aren't necessary in the final product, or definitely aren't necessary of just being to the point that you can start getting feedback. Can they maintain their top spot? Oh, yes. And got fastest. So Age, Brandon, Sarah, Jody, Thinky, Shammy, Phil, Maureen, Dayla, and John A. Question 4 of 6. What question will reveal if a feature should be in the MVP or not? I don't know if I mentioned this a lot, but is this something a user will use? Would we be able to go live without this if we had to? Is this feature valuable? Or is this feature in the backlog? So think in terms, what would be the best way to filter out whether something should be in the MVP or not? So yes, in this case, I would say it's, would we be able to go live without this feature if we had to? And if the answer is no, there's no way for us possibly to go live or to use this system, then it might be something to not have as an MVP for the definition of MVP of getting the smallest thing out the door that the customers can use. Is this something that the user will use? Just because they use it doesn't mean it's necessarily entirely valuable to them, and doesn't mean it's necessarily blocking from going live. A feature can be valuable without necessarily being above the threshold to where the system could be used without it. Okay, let's see here. Oh, and Age is at a very fast clicking today, so good job. Okay, 2 questions left. Oops. This is acting up just a little bit. I think I skipped something. Question 5, enter to start quiz. Okay. Answer fast to get more points. I haven't used Minty for a while and I'm evidently not sure what to click on. Which is not a benefit of creating a minimal viable product? Is it faster feedback? Which is not. Remember, test assumptions sooner, faster return on investment. Initial release will appeal to a larger number of customers, or better clarity for prioritization. This one's a little bit tricky, but which one of these is not going to be a benefit of creating a minimal viable product? Right. So the initial release may appeal to a smaller number of customers, because you may be able to get things that one segment of your customers can use while deferring things that another segment of your customers can use. Faster return on investment, MVP is often going to give you a faster return on investment because if we start appealing to, if we meet the needs of some customers, we're now able to get return on investment from their use of it, whether they're paying us or it's internal. Whereas if we waited till it did things for all customers, we defer that ability to start getting a return on investment from it. And our leaderboard. Age holds the top spot. Very nice. Okay, last question. Answer fast to get more points. Have you forwarded Lunch and Learn invite to a coworker or friend? I think I made all these. Well, here, you know the right answer is yeah. I think all of these count as valid answers for it. It's just a matter of clicking on it the fastest. But I would encourage you to, if there's a topic that you find would benefit someone, forward the invite to them. They're not specific to you unless they click on and unsubscribe for you. But I encourage you to forward them to a friend. It's, we can always take more people, and if you're finding them valuable, maybe your friends were too. Some people have told me, no, this is my secret weapon. I don't tell anyone about it. I'd encourage you to go ahead and share the large yes. Okay, our top spot is, let's see who won here. I think he got the fastest this time. Okay, so Age got the top spot. So send me a Age, send me a screenshot of this, or I'll recognize you, I'm sure. Let me know how to pronounce your name for one thing, but let me know your shirt size and address you want sent to, and I will get something headed out to you. Probably one of these shirts if I've got your size. If not, I've got some other shirts. We'll get that headed your way. So thank you everybody for coming. I am going to oh, you have feedback. What did you like and what can I improve? Go ahead and please take a few seconds on that. This is very, very useful to me. Just being able to, I come back to these, particularly when I give a talk again, I go back and say, okay, what can I improve on this? So please take the time to do that. I appreciate that. I'm going to stop the streaming and or stop the recording.